Hello everyone, I am Jason Alcott, author of The Sowing Principle, and today we are going to take a look at my top 3 takeaways from Greg McKeown's book, Effortless. This is an awesome book, one you want to have in your library. We're going to add a link in the show notes so you can grab your copy. This is a follow-up to his book, Essentialism, that we actually did a video on a little while ago, and they're very similar in his style and the way he kind of presents his ideas. So he covers a lot of really practical stuff in Effortless. He takes these topics and he breaks them into such great pieces, so even coming up with top 3 takeaways is really challenging because each chapter he has sort of a practical idea and a way that you can really apply it in your life. So I'd highly recommend that you grab it. So let's dive in a little bit more to the concepts that are talked about here. Now I love the way that Greg starts this book out because he starts it out with a Bible verse. He starts out with Matthew 11:30. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. And those are the words of Jesus. And you know what's great about that is just because this is like a self-development book. You're not going to find this in the Christian section of your bookstore. You might not even find it in a Christian bookstore per se, but he's just got this idea, you know, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. And I do want to dive a little bit more into that verse at the end of this video and just kind of unpack that a little bit more. But first, you know, this book, what he's talking about with Effortless, you know, we walk around with people that have maybe suffered burnout or that are working incredibly hard, and, you know, we wear that as sort of this badge of honor. And he says, you know, very specifically in the book, you know, burnout is not a badge of honor. We put too much emphasis on our ability to work hard to get towards more of the essential things in life, to work towards maybe God's purpose in our life or what we deem to be the path that we want to be on or to be able to make an impact. And he sort of wants to disassociate the things that, you know, what we could be doing might actually not need to be hard per se. It could still be a great work. You can still be making an impact, working towards your purpose. But why does it have to be quote unquote hard work? Why does it have to push you towards the edge? You know, we talked a number of videos ago about being busy and how so often when somebody asks you know, how are you doing? Our response is we're busy. And we say that as like a badge of honor. And I asked you the question, I said, okay, was busy ever your goal? Busy's not my goal. I don't wake up in the morning being like, today's a good day if I can be really busy. That's just not my goal. Today's a good day if I can spend time with my family, if I can work on what I believe God's calling me to be able to work towards, if I can impact the lives of others, if I can uplift people like yourself and encourage you to go after what God's calling you to do. Those are good days, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to be busy. And so that's sort of his underlying premise of this book, is just moving away from that idea, that thought process that, you know, if we're not moving at 200 miles an hour, if we're not flying and working incredibly hard, then we must not be actually working towards the purpose that maybe was in our life if we aren't pushing ourselves to the limits of maybe our capacities. So let's unpack my top 3 takeaways. So my first takeaway, my top takeaway of the book is this chapter titled Invert. And he asks this question and he says, what if this could be easy? What if this could be effortless? You know, looking at a task, looking at something that's in front of you and saying, what if I'm coming at this from the wrong perspective? You know, he does this sort of little bit of a walk back through history. When you think about it, we've talked about this before. In order to survive in the past, we need to be able to create food for our families, create shelter. And there's these sort of core ideas that allowed us to survive. We have this natural tendency as humans, you and I, we both do this, but we have a natural tendency towards the path of least resistance because we want to have capacity and energy in reserve in case we need to fight off a lion or a bear or something like that, which I know happens to you in your daily life. But we're well past that now. And now we've kind of flipped the scales and we've got this idea that anything worthwhile is sort of going to be uphill, or it's going to be hard work, or you're going to need to put in extra effort and push yourself to the limits. But our core mindset still is, you know, path of least resistance. So now we've got these great things that we'd like to be able to do with our lives, impacting people, moving God's kingdom forward, moving towards our purpose, and these sort of essential things like he talked about in his other book, you know, identifying the essential things in your life, but they're not necessarily always related to our survival. And then so what we've done with those things is that we've said these things are difficult and hard. Right? It's going to be hard to actually make an impact. It's going to be hard or challenging. We associate these words with pursuing God's purpose in my life. And if it's anything of any worth or value, it must be hard to do. Even as I write them down and I was talking about these in my mind, I'm going, yeah, I tell myself this. I say this to myself. I say, well, if it's worth doing, it must be, it's going to take hard work, right? Really? Like that's not really the best question, because then follow me on this one. Then on a daily basis, when we're trying to come up with that simple thing that we can do that will actually allow us to move forward, move towards the impact that God's wanting to do in and through you. If we believe it's going to be hard work, we choose the path of least resistance and don't actually take any steps forward. So it's really a perspective shift and allowing your mind to be released of the idea that anything worthwhile doing requires hard work. It's not that that isn't a part of it, but could there be an easier way to do it? Could there be an effortless way for you to set yourself up to succeed, to be able to take the steps that are necessary to move forward? My number 2 top takeaway from this book is a chapter called Progress. And the subtitle is The Courage to be Rubbish. I love that. Love that idea. He talks about Pixar in this chapter and how they made all these incredible movies, Toy Story, Finding Nemo, Cars, amazing movies that we watch them and go, man, these are really entertaining. Wow, they really knocked it out of the park. But he says, at Pixar, they have this culture where they allow people to make a lot of mistakes. They allow people to actually put out ideas that might be considered rubbish. Like if you looked at the early ideas of what was the beginning of Toy Story or what was the beginning of Finding Nemo, they really allow people to get ideas out there and bounce them around so that they can come up with what will eventually be the good ideas. And I think when we consume content like, Finding Nemo, Toy Story, The Invincibles, we see these finished products and they're incredible and they're amazing. And you go, I don't think I could ever do that. But you're not looking at all the iterations that it took to get to that point. If you saw what they first had when they first proposed these ideas around Toy Story, you'd be like, that's rubbish. That is not a good movie. Nobody's going to want to watch that. But they allowed people to sort of make those mistakes, fail in such a way that they had the capacity to be able to make them better, because in and of the rubbish that was being created, they found these incredible gems and were able to put together these incredible pieces of art that we all now enjoy with our families and children. What do I need to learn in my life? What do you need to learn in your life where I just need to be able to go out and make a lot more mistakes so that I can get better at that particular craft or what it is, that I'm sort of working on or working toward? And the last idea he had in this chapter was this idea of something called a zero draft. And again, it's just a perspective shift, a mindset shift. Like if you wanted to write a book, I know there's a lot of people that want to write a book. You've got a rough draft and then you kind of go through all these iterations and editing and all this stuff. And then eventually you've got your final copy and it goes to print, right? I've got the sewing principle here behind me and it kind of went through that process. But he talks about a step, going one step back. He's like, start with a zero draft, like before you even get a rough draft. Because if you think that your rough draft has to be any good and it prevents you from writing, then it's not working. You got to go one step back. Write a zero draft, which is literally just get words on the page, right? So that you've got something, some flow and something to work from. And I found this for myself a lot. Like if I had something down, anything down on paper was a much better place to start than staring at a blank page. So if I needed to do some editing or concept or an ideas, whatever I was writing about in the book, even if I had some notes for that I jotted down as I was, going through my day or going for a walk or ideas about what I wanted to talk about, anything down on paper was better than nothing. And so this idea of a zero draft, the courage to be rubbish, it's not something necessarily that people are going to see, but you got to be able to willing to go through the steps of building something, of actually creating something that can be refined so that you can actually create something that is going to have an impact once it's been through that sort of refining fire. But you got to start somewhere. The courage to be rubbish. I love this chapter. And my number 3 takeaway from Effortless comes from this chapter called Prevent. And the subtitle is Solve the Problem Before It Happens. Every day we come up against challenges in our life, little things in our life that annoy us, frustrate us, make our day a little bit more challenging. And what we do is we manage them. And we continue to manage them on a daily basis, or however often that particular challenge or problem comes up. We manage it, but we don't actually fix it or solve it. The reality is if you can manage a problem inside of a day in less time than it would take to actually solve it for the future, you'll probably choose to manage it. The path of least resistance, right? So I'll choose to manage the problem because in the moment, it's only going to take me 2 minutes to deal with it and manage the problem. But then if that 2 minutes shows up every day for the next, however long, months, years, whatever it is, or I could spend 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour fixing the problem so I never have to spend those 2 minutes managing the problem again. When you say it that way, it makes a lot more sense to fix the problem, but we often don't think about the time spent over the long term. So he tells the story of this desk drawer that he has in his office. He's trying to pull this desk drawer out and there's this pencil case in there and he's constantly trying to fix the drawer or get the drawer to go back in. And it takes him 30 seconds every time he's got to close the drawer. But actually to fix the drawer so that it never happened again, it only took him like 15 minutes. Take it apart, get whatever it was that was jammed in there. And then he never had to deal with this drawer that he was trying to fix on his desk all the time. It's a really simple example, but it resonated with me. Are there things in my life that keep cropping up, that come up again and again and again, that I choose to manage instead of actually getting to the root of the problem and fixing it so it's not actually going to be an issue for me in the long term? It's an idea just of like looking around corners. It's looking ahead and going, how can I potentially save time, open up capacity? How can I make this more effortless, right? Term from the book, effortless, by solving something once today so that it doesn't continue to create future problems going forward. Greg has this great line in his book where he says, of course you can't make everything effortless. But you can make more of the essential things be a little bit less impossible. Like, can you take something that once was impossible, make it possible, then make it a little easier, and then make it effortless? And these are the big sort of essential things that, Greg talked about in his previous book, Essentialism, that you want to be working towards, moving the rocks that God's calling you to move forward in your life. And this brings me back around to Matthew 11, verse 30. Again, Jesus' words, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. I've had a perspective shift on this verse over the last little while, and I think mentally I allowed it to sit with me in the wrong way, because I looked at it and said, well, I've already got a yoke and a burden that I'm carrying, and now Jesus is telling me that I get to carry his burden as well. And so I kind of saw the two things as stacking on top of each other, right? It's like, okay, I appreciate the fact, Jesus, that your yoke and burden are light, but I've already got my own yoke and burden. I don't really need to take on yours. But that's really not what Jesus is talking about here, is it? He's talking about his yoke and burden are light. And so he wants to trade places with me, which is essentially what he did. He wants to trade places with you, whereby he wants to take your yoke, your burden, and allow you to carry his. As someone who likes to be in control, and maybe this is like you, but I like to be in control. But we weren't built to be in control. We were built to give control to someone else, built to give control to God. And the amazing things about giving control to God, allowing God to have control in your life, is that he does not struggle with the same things that you and I do. He doesn't struggle with anxiety or fear. He doesn't make mistakes. And when we can wrap our brains around that and allow Christ to carry that burden, it's incredibly freeing for us. So if you're feeling that weight or feeling anxiety or fear about how you're going to understand or grasp what God's calling you to do, how are you going to discover your purpose? If you're feeling that, you can give that to him, and he wants to be able to solve that for you. So I'm excited for you and all the incredible things that you're learning, the incredible things that God's doing in and through you. And I want to challenge you this week to take a look at things. And when you come up against a challenging problem or task or thing that you're trying to tackle, especially if it has to do with God's purpose in your life, ask yourself that question. What if this could be easy? What if I can approach this from a different perspective? Because I know that God wants to speak into your heart. He's got great things for you. Have an absolutely awesome rest of your day, and I look forward to sharing with you again next week.